One of the craziest things that a Targaryen has ever done may not have actually been as crazy as it seems. Something that when you first hear about it, you say, okay, that's the most obvious example of complete insanity that you could possibly have. But upon further examination, maybe you can start to see the reason behind it, even though it didn't work. Before we get into the details, I do want to give a spoiler warning because the show Knight of the Seven Kingdoms is coming out pretty soon, and this will be spoiling the fate of one of the major characters of that show. I'm sure that a number of you will probably know which act of madness I'm talking about, but if you don't and you want to remain completely unspoiled about everything that has to do with Dunk and Egg or A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms, well, maybe this isn't the video for you. And to give you a little more time to navigate away, I will also say this is a remake of a video that I put out a long time ago, where the audio quality was absolutely awful, so now I can finally private that video and do it better. So yeah, in terms of A Song of Ice and Fire theories, this is one of my oldest ones, and now that hopefully the people who want to avoid spoilers have gone away or paused or whatever, I can say today we're talking about Aerion Brightflame and the fact that at the end of his life, he decided to drink wildfire. The first mention that we get of this in the books is from a Jon chapter of A Clash of Kings where he's talking to Jeor Mormont. He says, Aerion the Monstrous? Jon knew the name. The prince who thought he was a dragon was one of old Nan's more gruesome tales. His little brother Bran had loved it. Gior responds, the very one, though he named himself Aerion Brightflame. One night in his cups he drank a jar of wildfire after telling his friends it would transform him into a dragon. But the gods were kind, and it transformed him into a corpse. Then in a Davos chapter from A Storm of Swords we get the following exchange between Stannis and Selyse. Lord husband, said Queen Selyse, you have more men than Aegon did 300 years ago. All you lack are dragons. The look Stannis gave her was dark. 9 mages crossed the sea to hatch Aegon III's cache of dragon eggs. Baelor the Blessed prayed over his for half a year. Aegon IV built dragons of wood and iron. Aerion Brightflame drank wildfire to transform himself. The mages failed, King Baelor's prayers went unanswered, the wooden dragons burned, and Prince Aerion died screaming. In Jaime 5, A Storm of Swords, when he's talking about why he killed Mad King Aerys and sort of having a flashback to the whole scene, we get the following. The traitors want my city, I heard him tell Rossert, but I'll give them naught but ashes. Let Robert be king over charred bones and cooked meat. The Targaryens never bury their dead. They burn them. Aerys meant to have the greatest funeral pyre of them all. Though if truth be told, I do not believe he truly expected to die. Like Aerion Brightfire before him, Aerys thought the fire would transform him, that he would rise again, reborn as a dragon and turn all his enemies to ash. So there we have 3 different mentions of Aerion Brightflame drinking wildfire and how it killed him, and basically this is remembered through history as being a completely insane and mad act. For very good reason, because if you've seen what wildfire can do, you would never drink it. The one thing, though, that we're always reminded is that Aerion believed that drinking this wildfire would somehow transform him. And this is actually what I kind of want to dial in on to show that maybe there is something to this idea, even if he did it wrong or didn't know exactly what he was doing. And I also do want to just say Aerion was completely mad. He was a crazy person. He was cruel. He was horrible. I'm not defending Aerion Brightflame in any way. I'm just trying to say that if you look a little bit deeper, there might actually be some interesting logic to the idea that maybe drinking wildfire could have transformed him if he had done it in the proper way. The reason that I suspect this is because we actually do have a character in our story who we end up getting a POV chapter of, who has a flashback to seemingly drinking in fire and being transformed. And that is in the form of Melisandre, who seems to at this point be an immortal, fire magic powered sort of being. I'll read for you now a little bit out of the Melisandre POV chapter, and you can make up your own mind as to whether or not you think she's talking about drinking wildfire in this weird flashback that she gets. This comes as she's looking into the flames and getting her visions, and I'm going to read a big chunk of this vision sequence just so that we get this line in full context, and just because it's cool to see what looking into the flames is like from Melisandre's POV. The Red Priestess closed her eyes and said a prayer, then opened them once more to face the hearth fire. One more time. She had to be certain. Many a priest and priestess before her had been brought down by false visions, by seeing what they wished to see instead of what the Lord of Light had sent. Stannis was marching south into peril, the king who carried the fate of the world upon his shoulders, Azor Ahai reborn. Surely R'hllor would vouchsafe her a glimpse of what awaited him. "Show me Stannis, Lord," she prayed. "Show me your king, your instrument." Visions danced before her, gold and scarlet, flickering, forming, and melting and dissolving into one another. Shapes strange and terrifying and seductive. She saw the eyeless faces again, staring out at her from sockets weeping blood. Then the towers by the sea, crumbling as the dark tide came sweeping over them, rising from the depths. Shadows in the shape of skulls, skulls that turned into mist. Bodies locked together in lust, writhing and rolling and clawing. Through curtains of fire, great winged shadows wheeled against a hard blue sky. The girl. I must find the girl again. The gray girl on the dying horse. Jon Snow would expect that of her, and soon. It would not be enough to say the girl was fleeing. He would want more. He would want the when and where, and she did not have that for him. She had seen the girl only once. A girl as gray as ash, and even as I watched, she crumbled and blew away. A face took shape within the hearth. Stannis? She thought for just a moment. But no, these were not his features. A wooden face, corpse white. Was this the enemy? 1,000 red eyes floated in the rising flames. He sees me. Beside him, a boy with a wolf's face threw back his head and howled. The red priestess shuddered. Blood trickled down her thigh, black and smoking. The fire was inside her, an agony, an ecstasy, filling her, searing her, transforming her. Shimmers of heat traced patterns on her skin, insistent as a lover's hand. Strange voices called out to her from days long past. "Melanie," she heard a woman cry. A man's voice called, "Lot 7." She was weeping, and her tears were flame, and still she drank it in. Snowflakes swirled from a dark sky, and ashes rose to meet them. The gray and white whirling around each other as flaming arrows arced above a wooden wall, and dead things shambled silent through the cold beneath a great gray cliff where fires burned inside 100 caves. Then the wind rose and the white mist came sweeping in, impossibly cold. And one by one, the fires went out. Afterward, only the skulls remained. Death, thought Melisandre. The skulls are death. The flames crackled softly, and in their crackling she heard the whispered name. Jon Snow. His long face floated before her, limed in tongues of red and orange, appearing and disappearing again, a shadow half seen behind a fluttering curtain. Now he was a man, now a wolf, now a man again. But the skulls were here as well. The skulls were all around him. Melisandre had seen his danger before, had tried to warn the boy of it. Enemies all around him, daggers in the dark. He would not listen. Unbelievers never listened until it was too late. "What do you see, my lady?" the boy asked softly. Skulls. 1,000 skulls and the bastard boy again. Jon Snow. Whenever she was asked what she saw within her flames, Melisandre would answer, "Much and more." But seeing was never as simple as those words suggested. It was an art, and like all arts, it demanded mastery, discipline, study, pain. That too. R'hllor spoke to his chosen ones through blessed fire, in a language of ash and cinder and twisting flame that only a god could truly grasp. Melisandre had practiced her art for years beyond count, and she had paid the price. There was no one, even in her order, who had her skill at seeing the secrets half revealed and half concealed within the sacred flames. I'm now going to skip ahead a little bit in the Melisandre POV chapter and look at a couple other lines that give some more context to the conversation we're about to have, and then we'll go back and take a look at the most relevant part of that passage. The boy who's in the room with her who asked what she saw in the flames is Devon Seaworth, the son of Davos, who she keeps around as her squire, in her mind as a gift to Davos to basically protect him because so many of Davos's sons died on the Blackwater, and Melisandre feels kind of bad about that. A little while later, he asks her, "Does my lady wish to break her fast?" And she thinks, "Food. Yes, I should eat." Some days she forgot. R'hllor provided her with all the nourishment her body needed, but that was something best concealed from mortal men. This is where we learn that Melisandre is definitely no longer a normal human. She thinks of herself as not mortal, and she no longer actually requires eating or sleeping the way that normal people do, she just does it to keep up appearances. At least the eating part of it. She really does seem to dislike sleep. She thinks about that a lot in her chapter, and she spends all of her nights basically keeping her fire going and just waiting for the dawn. She does occasionally doze off for a little bit, it seems, but it would genuinely appear to be the case that R'hllor provides her body with all of the energy that she needs, or something provides her body with the energy that it needs that is not natural. Then, much later on in the chapter, Mance is revealed to have been glamored to be Rattleshirt, and then they didn't actually burn Mance Rayder. And when she's revealing this to Jon, she transforms him back into Mance right before Jon's eyes, and she explains to him how glamour works, basically saying that the essence of the person doesn't change, only their seeming, and that this is sort of a trick or an illusion. Then we get the following passage. She made it sound a simple thing and easy. They need never know how difficult it had been or how much it had cost her. That was a lesson Melisandre had learned long before Asshai. The more effortless the sorcery appeared, the more men fear the sorcerer. When the flames had licked at Rattleshirt, the ruby at her throat had grown so hot that she feared her own flesh might start to smoke and blacken. Thankfully, Lord Snow had delivered her from that agony with his arrows. While Stannis had seethed at the defiance, she had shuddered with relief. So, okay, we've established that Melisandre is something different than a human. She's not mortal, she doesn't require food or sleep, and that she likes to make sure that things don't look too visibly difficult when she's doing her sorcery. So, like, she's never going to make something look more difficult than it actually is. So now I want to return to that sort of flashback paragraph that we get in the middle of her having her visions looking into the flames. The Red Priestess shuddered. Blood trickled down her thigh, black and smoking. The fire was inside her, an agony and ecstasy, filling her, searing her, transforming her. Shimmers of heat traced patterns on her skin, insistent as a lover's hand. Strange voices called to her from days long past. "Melanie," she heard a woman cry. A man's voice called, "Lot 7." She was weeping and her tears were flame, and still she drank it in. So this is separated by a paragraph break with visions on either side of it. And you could take this basically as what's going on in the room at the moment. Maybe there is blood trickling down her thigh, black and smoking, and maybe she's crying tears of flame in the room there in that very moment. But that would certainly be making it look pretty difficult to just be staring into the flames, and I really don't think that every single time Melisandre's looking into the flames, she is crying tears of flame or having blood leak out of her black and smoking. I don't think this is what's going on visibly in the room right now. I think she's probably in the room right now just looking into the flames like she always does. Basically, that means that if she's not visibly crying tears of flame every time she tries to look for visions in the fires, that means that this entire paragraph seems to be a flashback. So let's take a look at what it's a flashback to. As far as I can tell, this is all a flashback to her transformation from Melanie, the little girl who was sold into slavery, probably to the Red Temple, into Melisandre, the Red Priestess of R'hllor. This is why the voices that she hears in her flashback are Melanie and Lot 7. The shimmers of heat tracing patterns on her skin could come from the fact that in many of the free cities, people who are sold into slavery are tattooed to show what type of slave that they are. So perhaps she was tattooed by some sort of fire magic, thus explaining the shimmers of heat tracing patterns on her skin. This is a flashback to the Red Priestess slave tattooing process. But if you take all of this as a flashback to her sort of transformation into Melisandre, this apparently immortal fire magic being of some sort, the really interesting lines for the theory that we're taking a look at today is how she thinks that the fire was inside of her, an agony and ecstasy, filling her, searing her, transforming her, and then the paragraph ends with the line, "and still she drank it in." We spent the first part of this video taking a look at different passages that all hint at Aerion Brightflame believing that he could drink wildfire and that it would somehow transform him into a dragon. Then we get inside the POV of the most magically powerful fire magic being that we've seen in this story so far, and she has a flashback to drinking in the fire and how it was inside her, searing her and transforming her, and still she drank it in. This all wrapped up together has led me to speculate that in some form or another I think that the transformation process Melisandre has gone through to become whatever it is that she is now involves at one point or another drinking in wildfire. That would mean, as I said at the beginning of the video, that one of the most mad acts in the history of the Targaryens, Aerion drinking wildfire, might actually be based in more reality than it would first seem. This act that it seems like on the surface can only be explained by complete madness, might actually be based in some genuine fire magic ritual that he was trying unsuccessfully to replicate. So, if this is indeed true, we have a few questions to answer, namely, how did he find out about this Red Priestess magic ritual? Also, why didn't it actually work? And why does he think it was going to transform him into a dragon rather than some sort of Melisandre thing? Well, to tackle the last question there first, I do think that in general he thought of himself as a dragon even before he did his whole transformation thing, and the Targaryens at this point were fairly obsessed with trying to bring back dragons, including him. He definitely wanted dragons back to restore the Targaryen power to what it used to be, so it could just be a case of creative language here. When he's saying he would transform into a dragon, he could just mean like an incredibly fire magically powerful Targaryen. Alternatively, though, it is possible that he genuinely thought that this magic could also be used to birth dragons in some way, or maybe he was just confused about what exactly the ritual was going to do. Another thing that's interesting to keep in mind is it does seem like there is some sort of sacrifice that was used to birth dragons in the first place. In the opening of Hot D, we see in the whole little tapestry scene that looks like there's some sort of sacrifice going on to birth the dragon using fire magic. And so, possibly, this is a form of ritual sacrifice that was used to create dragons in the past. And if you're putting your soul into the dragon by doing this ritual sacrifice, maybe there is some sort of text that he found that explained that you can transform someone's soul into a dragon soul by feeding them wildfire. It's just that he didn't do this when there was a proper ritual sacrifice going on. If he had instead done this on Dany's funeral pyre or next to it as she was hatching her dragons, who knows, maybe his soul would have gone into one of the dragons and he truly would have been transformed into a dragon. And that does sort of get into beginning to answer the question of why this didn't work. He was clearly doing this when he was drunk and just, I don't know, trying to show off, it would seem. It said that he was in his cups and he drank the cask of wildfire and just, died. But if he had done this in the proper moment or in the proper circumstances, perhaps the result could have been different, as I said. I'm once again not saying Aerion wasn't stupid or he wasn't mad on any level. He was very clearly mad and crazy and all that sort of stuff. But he did actually seem to have this based in some sort of reality, right? This wasn't just completely out of left field. The idea that he could drink wildfire to transform himself seems to have come from somewhere. So that brings us then to the last of those three questions. Where did he possibly learn this idea if this is some sort of ancient ritual that Melisandre knows because she went through it at the Red Temple, but it seems like no one else in Westeros has any idea about this? One of the first things that you could point out when trying to figure out where he would have learned about this is the fact that for at least part of his life, he was exiled to Essos. So perhaps he did, go exploring certain things about magic, trying to figure out how dragons were made, just researching into fire magic in general, and maybe this is something he came across in his time across the Narrow Sea. Over in Essos, the faith of R'hllor is much more common than it is in Westeros, so maybe there would be more people with this knowledge, or more books about it, or something like that, where he could have learned this pretty easily. But even during his time over in Westeros, I don't think that we should overlook the influence of the Pyromancer Guild, who are the people who make the wildfire in the first place, and they seem to have a pretty good knowledge of fire magic and sort of ancient lost secrets that they probably don't really like to share with people who aren't part of their order or aren't Targaryens. So I think it's entirely reasonable to think that Aerion heard about this ritual either over in Essos or during his time in Westeros talking with the pyromancers, and perhaps he was working on trying to figure out how to make it work for him. Or even if he didn't hear about it from the pyromancers, it would make sense that the Targaryens, deep down in the vaults with all their other treasures, somewhere hidden away, they probably do have some books about ancient Valyrian magic that the common folk don't really get to see and that we maybe haven't even heard about yet. So, whether he heard about it in Essos, from the pyromancers, or in some old book somewhere, it seems like he learned about this ritual and had an idea in his head that he was going to eventually attempt it, but then one night he got drunk and decided to just go ahead with the main part of the ritual without doing any of the rest of it properly or without learning how to do it properly, and that's what led to him dying drinking this wildfire rather than being transformed. There's also, of course, definitely room for him to have learned about this in some sort of dream or something like that, and I think that opens up another good point that a lot of these dreams are manipulated by people like Bloodraven or other people who are tapped into the Weirwood net, and so perhaps if Aerion is as crazy and mad as he certainly seems to be, whoever was sending him this dream was showing him a real ritual, knowing that he would do it improperly and then take himself out of the line to eventually become the king, which is probably something that is good for the Targaryens, good for the realm, and good for whoever would have sent him this dream to manipulate him. So basically, there are at least four different places Arion could have learned about this, and the mind can run wild with speculation about how he learned about it. But I do think all of this drinking and fire and being transformed, it just lines up far too well with what we get from the Melisandre POV to just be complete coincidence. I think that George R. R. Martin has added these elements to mesh together and hint at something larger going on here. That's why I think that the case is pretty darn solid that what is held up as one of the most obviously mad Targaryen acts was in fact based far more in reality than most people would assume. So that's the base case that I wanted to make in this video, but I would like to add a few little bits of speculation on top of it if you're still with me. The first is just thinking about how this ritual would have worked when Melisandre was going through it herself at the Red Temple, because it seems like she was sold into slavery, purchased by the Red Temple, drank in this wildfire, and was transformed into the not needing to eat or sleep immortal version of Melisandre that we see her as today. Now, as I said, this is sort of additional speculation or additional tinfoil, if you will, layered on top of the original theory. But the way that I would assume this would work, because only death can pay for life and sacrifices seem to be important in this universe, well, it would seem to me that what they would do at the Red Temple is probably bring in a bunch of slaves and have them all drink wildfire at once, many of them not making it through, and their deaths paying for the magical sacrifice that's needed to transform the few that were chosen by R'hllor. It'd basically be a big wildfire version of the drink the Kool-Aid moment, and as creepy as that is, I do think that this is probably how it went down for Melisandre if I had to guess. It's not based on as much as the other stuff we've talked about so far, but it does make sense with the only death can pay for life aspect of the magic in this universe, so if we do get a future flashback to Melisandre's transformation process in the Winds of Winter, I just want to plant my flag as this is my guess as to how it went down. Basically, Jonestown with wildfire. And as I pointed out, that flashback paragraph ends with her thinking, and still she drank it in. So maybe what happened is that most of the people who start drinking this wildfire don't actually finish it, and then therefore die, but Melisandre was one who actually finished drinking it in, and therefore fully went through with the transformation. I could see that also being how it could work. As for why it would actually turn her into some sort of immortal being, in addition to all of the sacrifice of all the people who didn't make it through the ritual, I think there's a decent chance that what happened to Melisandre as part of this ritual is that she was bound to a glass candle. Glass candles are a fire magic object that's revealed to us to be sort of like the fire magic version of weirwoods. You can send dreams with them, you can sort of invade people's dreams with them, or see things that are far away. In addition to these powers, we actually got to learn a little bit more about glass candles from an unused draft of A Feast for Crows that George has at the Cushing Library, which I did a whole video on those unused drafts if you want to check it out after this. But one of the important things that we learned is, at least one of the things George is thinking about, is that you can bind yourself to a glass candle, and the man who's bound to it cannot die so long as the flame doesn't go out. And this is like a magical flame, so it's not like the candle's gonna burn out. This is a powerful magical flame that, apparently according to the draft, just needs to be renewed from time to time with blood. So this goes further into creating the Weirwood glass candle parallel,
where you can seemingly bind yourself to a weirwood or wed yourself to the trees and become immortal, presumably so long as the weirwoods keep getting blood sacrificed to them. I've talked about this in a ton of past videos, how basically all the blood sacrificed to the weirwoods that is part of the Old Ways religion definitely seems to be going towards feeding the life force of the green seers who are down in the roots of the weirwoods, and therefore allow people who worship the green seers and the weirwoods to access their power. So you feed blood into the weirwoods to keep the green seers down there alive, and it would seem you can somehow feed blood or sacrifice to these glass candles to keep the people who are bound to them alive. I think this is the most reasonable explanation for what happened to Melisandre. She's bound to a glass candle, whether she's aware of that fully or not, which is why she's immortal and provided all of her nourishment by R'hllor. She doesn't need to eat or sleep because she is tied to this thing that keeps her alive no matter what. Glass candles are pretty rare in Westeros. They have a few of them at the Citadel, but if you have a rare fire magical object, one of the few places besides the Citadel that I think one would probably be pretty likely to be is somewhere in the Red Keep with all of the Targaryen treasures. Remember, they are the ones coming over from Valyria, they're bringing dragon skulls, they're bringing lots of crazy things from Valyria, and so them bringing some glass candles seems entirely reasonable. Between the Targaryens and the Pyromancers Guild, who are both at the Red Keep doing their work, I would imagine there are glass candles down there somewhere. This is another thing that I've talked about in a lot of older videos. So, another bit of additional speculation that I would sort of add to this whole theory is the idea that perhaps part of this ritual, in addition to drinking the wildfire, you need to do something with the glass candle to bind yourself to it, potentially being sacrificing a bunch of other people to bind you to the candle as you drink in this fire and are transformed. This could explain what Aerion Brightflame did wrong if he was only doing the part of the ritual where you drink in the wildfire and not the part to actually bind him to the glass candle, or perhaps there needed to be other sacrifices as he drank in this wildfire in order to actually bind him to the candle and transform him into this powerful, immortal fire magic being. So, again, if you add up all these bits of speculation here, you could imagine that if he had been working more closely with the pyromancers and he had done some sort of mass sacrifice at the time where he drank in this wildfire, perhaps the transformation could have been successful. Which brings us to the other person who we mentioned in the beginning of the video, thought that perhaps they would be transformed by the fire and not actually die. The Mad King Aerys, who was planning to blow up the entirety of King's Landing and was working very closely and speaking directly to his pyromancer at the time of doing this. He at this point had actually named Rossert, his favorite pyromancer, as Hand of the King, and that's the one who Jaime had to kill right before he killed Mad King Aerys. So I'll now again revisit what we were told about Mad King Aerys and when Jaime actually killed him. He saw traitors everywhere, and Varys was always there to point out any he might have missed. So his grace commanded his alchemists to place caches of wildfire all over King's Landing, beneath Baelor's Sept and the hovels of Fleabottom, under the stables and storehouses, at all 7 gates, even in the cellars of the Red Keep itself. Everything was done in the utmost secrecy by a handful of master pyromancers. They did not even trust their own acolytes to help. The Queen's eyes had been closed for years, and Rhaegar was busy marshalling an army. But Aerys knew Mace and Dagger Hand was not utterly stupid, and with Rossart, Bellis, and Garrigus coming and going night and day, he became suspicious. Chelstead, that was his name, Lord Chelstead. It had come back to him suddenly with the telling. I'd thought the man craven, but the day he confronted Aerys, he found some courage somewhere. He did all he could to dissuade him. He reasoned, he jested, he threatened, and finally he begged. When that failed, he took off his chain of office and flung it down on the floor. Aerys burnt him alive for that, and hung his chain about the neck of Rossart, his favorite pyromancer, the man who had cooked Lord Rickard Stark in his own armor. And all the time I stood by the foot of the Iron Throne in my white plate, still as a corpse, guarding my liege and all his sweet secrets. My sworn brothers were all away, you see, but Aerys liked to keep me close. I was my father's son, so he did not trust me. He wanted me where Varys could watch me day and night, so I heard it all. He remembered how Rossart's eyes would shine when he unrolled his maps to show where the substance must be placed. Garrigus and Bellis were the same. Rhaegar met Robert on the Trident, and you know what happened there. When word reached the court, Aerys packed the queen off to Dragonstone with Prince Viserys. Princess Elia would have gone as well, but he forbade it. Somehow he had gotten into his head that Prince Lewin must have betrayed Rhaegar on the Trident, but he thought he could keep Dorne loyal so long as he kept Elia and Aegon by his side. The traitors want my city, I heard him tell Rossart, but I'll give them naught but ashes. Let Robert be king over charred bones and cooked meat. The Targaryens never bury their dead, they burn them. Aerys meant to have the greatest funeral pyre of them all, though if truth be told I do not believe he truly expected to die. Like Aerion Brightfire before him, Aerys thought the fire would transform him, that he would rise again, reborn as a dragon, and turn all his enemies to ash. Ned Stark was racing south with Robert's van, but my father's forces reached the city first. Pycelle convinced the king that his warden of the west had come to defend him, so he opened the gates. The one time he should have heeded Varys, and he ignored him. My father had held back from the war, brooding on all the wrongs Aerys had done him, and determined that House Lannister should be on the winning side. The Trident decided him. It fell to me to hold the Red Keep, but I knew we were lost. I sent to Aerys asking his leave to make terms. My man came back with a royal command. Bring me your father's head, if you are no traitor. Aerys would have no yielding. Lord Rossart was with him, my messenger said. I knew what that meant. When I came on Rossart, he was dressed as a common man-at-arms, hurrying to a postern gate. I slew him first. Then I slew Aerys before he could find someone else to carry his message to the pyromancers. Days later, I hunted down the others and slew them as well. Bellis offered me gold, and Garrigus wept for mercy. Well, a sword's more merciful than fire, but I don't think Garrigus much appreciated the kindness I showed him. So, in addition to that line about how Aerys believed, like Aerion Brightfire before him, that he wasn't going to die, instead he would rise a dragon and turn all of his enemies to ash, he was seemingly working alongside his pyromancers to do some sort of mass wildfire sacrifice. Had Jaime not interrupted it, was he going to be trying some sort of crazy ritual with his pyromancers as he blew up King's Landing? It's certainly, as I said, some additional tinfoil or some added speculation on top of this, but I think it's a reasonable place to end when you grab on this little thread of drinking wildfire and pull it all the way to its conclusion. I certainly can't say for sure that the Mad King Aerys was planning to blow up King's Landing in some sort of crazy ritual that would have bound him to a glass candle and made him immortal like Melisandre, but the pieces are all somewhat there, at least they're nearby if they're not directly there. So let me know what you guys think of any of that stuff down there in the comments. To sum it all up, I would say that Aerys was definitely mad, and so was Aerion Brightflame. I'm not trying to, as I said in the beginning, defend them, or say that they weren't mad or crazy, but I am trying to shine a light on some of these actions that seem like the most mad things that the Targaryens have ever done, and as I said, just sort of put the pieces together to explain what I think they were trying to do, and maybe it's all based a little bit more in the reality of magic in this world than it would first seem to be. But also, just in case it needs to be said, don't drink wildfire if you're given the opportunity, and definitely don't try to sacrifice others to feed into your own life force. Neither of these things are good things to do. Thank you very much for watching. It is a good thing to hit the like and subscribe button and maybe check out something else on my channel, and I'll be back with something else very soon.